Welcome to the Archaeology Studio. Today's episode offers a guide through the House of Taga in the Sanhalem area of Tinian in the Mariana Islands. The House of Taga is world famous as the largest ever standing structure of the traditional Latte stonework architecture style. These stone ruins, known as Latte, last were used as a house during the late 1600s, and this particular house was associated with a strong chief named Taga. The House of Taga was part of a larger village of Latte houses at Sanhalem, at the southern coast of Tinian in the Mariana Islands. Excavations here have revealed several archaeological layers deep beneath the ground and dating long prior to the time of the Latte ruins of the House of Taga. In fact, these layers date back all the way to the time of the first cultural presence in the remote oceanic region of the Pacific. The deepest and oldest layer here at this particular site has been dated about 1500 through 1300 BC. Prior to 1500 BC, people did not yet inhabit the remote distance islands of the Pacific. After 1500 BC, archaeological sites in the Mariana Islands show the first evidence of people living in this vast region. One of those examples has been demonstrated in the deepest archaeological layer at the House of Taga in Tinian. On the surface of the site, the megalithic Latte ruins of the House of Taga were made after AD 1000 and continuing through the 1600s. This time period was equal with the time when other communities had expanded to inhabit the full extent of the remote oceanic region of the Pacific. On the surface today, the stone ruins of the House of Taga continue to impress everyone who visits at this site. The limestone blocks were quarried from a nearby geological source, and they were cut into the shapes of the pillars and capitals that once had supported a house. The original wood and thatch components of the house had disintegrated long ago, yet the stone elements have survived. This style of stonework has been known as the Latte style of architecture, found only in the Mariana Islands. The archaeological dating extends back as early as AD 1000 in some cases, and the Latte villages continued to be used throughout the Mariana Islands until the last decades of the 1600s. The end of the traditional Latte village period was associated with the effects of Spanish imperialism in the region, most intensively during the later 1600s. By the year 1700, people were forced to abandon their traditional villages, and the survivors were relocated into other villages in different islands. In the year 1742, Lord Anson stopped for repairs and supplies at Tinian, where he and his crew were awestruck by the megalithic ruins of the House of Taga. By 1742, some decades already had passed since the last time when anyone actually had lived at the House of Taga or at any other Latte house or village. In this context, Lord Anson and his crew in 1742 were impressed by the stone ruins in Tinian, referring to a bygone era of a civilization that mostly had been transformed through Spanish imperialism. Although some important clues still pointed to certain aspects of the more ancient traditional history, culture, and language of the Chamorro people of the Mariana Islands. The House of Taga in particular attracted attention as the largest Latte structure ever standing in the Mariana Islands. Moreover, this specific house was associated with legends of a strong chief named Taga. All of these ingredients captured the imaginations of explorers and scholars around the world. The House of Taga was part of one of the first archaeology expeditions in the entire Pacific region during 1887 by Antoine-Alfred Marche. The initial photographs from the expedition were damaged, but a few backup photographs from 1888 have survived as proof that most of the stone pillars of the House of Taga had stood upright with their overtopping capital stones still in their original positions during the late 1800s. Through time, these stones mostly have fallen to the ground. By the early 1900s, only 2 of the pillars still were standing with their original capitals. At the House of Taga, formal excavations were conducted during the 1920s by 2 different teams. Those results confirmed a thick and rich archaeological layer, including numerous burial features and dense habitation debris at the site. During the 1920s, the House of Taga was documented as the largest of several Latte houses at the village area of San Hallam. At least 13 Latte houses could be identified on the basis of their stone ruins, and each house was associated with a dense field of artifacts, food midden, and burial features. After World War II, additional studies expanded on the knowledge about the House of Taga. By this time, most of the site had been affected by the wartime activities and the post-war cleanup efforts. By now, only 1 stone pillar of the House of Taga still was standing upright with its capital stone in its original position. Meanwhile, the surrounding village of San Hallam had been mostly destroyed and bulldozed. For the last several decades, these stone ruins of the House of Taga have been the only surviving components visible at the site. During the late 1950s, an excavation inland or landward from the House of Taga happened to uncover much deeper and older archaeological layers. The lowest layer here contained finely decorated pottery that seemed similar with other findings that most likely predated 1000 BC, and therefore predated the House of Taga itself by more than 2,000 years. As part of my larger research of ancient sites of the Mariana Islands, I collaborated with Dr. Xiaochun Hong to study at the House of Taga and specifically to learn more about the deepest and oldest archaeological layers here. Our excavations started small at first, then expanded, eventually to uncover more than 90 square meters of contiguous area. This amount of excavation may seem small by global, international standards, but so far, it ranks as the largest single contiguous hand-excavated area in the region. The excavation revealed massive disturbance and bulldozing all across the surface, related with the World War II and post-war cleanup activities. Beneath the surface disturbance, the archaeological layers had remained intact, and they extended all the way back to the time when people first came to inhabit the shores of these remote islands. In this case, the radiocarbon dating in the deepest and oldest layer was confirmed at 1500 through 1300 BC. During the course of the excavation, we saw the traces of old wooden posts that once had supported houses at the ancient shoreline. Some of those posts had been braced by stones to hold their positions. The oldest post-raised houses were positioned very close with the ancient shoreline, evidently extending partially into the intertidal or shallow subtidal zone. At the inland or landward sides of the ancient houses, we found traces of stone-lined hearths or fireplaces. These features have survived at the landward sides of the houses outside the range of the tidal zone. Other stonework features were more difficult to interpret. clusters of cobbles and small boulders had been arranged in artificial constructions that could not happen naturally. Their purpose is unclear to us today, although we might consider different interpretations about stabilizing the ancient shoreline zone or formalizing the cultural use of the space for specific tasks or contexts. The ancient archaeological layers revealed diverse artifacts and food remains. The most abundant category, though, was the broken pottery. In the oldest archaeological layer, the finely decorated pottery has attracted special attention. This ancient pottery tradition can reveal multiple aspects of the technical and artistic expressions of the people who lived in the region ever since 1500 BC. The forms and styles were notably distinctive. By approximately 1100 through 1000 BC, the pottery and other artifacts began to change, in some cases quite dramatically. In addition to the pottery, the ancient artifacts included stone tools for pounding, chopping, and slicing actions. Shell ornaments were diverse. They were made in various forms of pendants, bands, ring-shaped objects, and beads. Many of these categories were made only during the earliest settlement period of 1500 through 1100 BC, and they add to the distinction that we otherwise would know primarily through the ancient pottery. Ancient fishing gear included pieces of fishing hooks, gorges, and different kinds of net weights. These findings may be compared with the food midden at the site, by far dominated by fish, and especially shellfish remains. In total, the range of findings at the site extends from the time of first settlement around 1500 BC all the way through the creation of the stonework of the Latte village, last inhabited during the late 1600s. Based on the physical evidence, many questions could be explored about what happened at this site through time. On the surface of the site today, the surviving ruins of the House of Taga call attention to the monumental quality of this place. The stonework here represents the epitome of the Latte architecture style. The House of Taga clearly was made to impress anyone who visits this place. The fuller extent of the site's archaeological record reveals much more than meets the eye, in fact, touching on the full range of cultural presence in the region. In concluding this episode, now you should be familiar with the House of Taga, the larger surroundings, and the long-term chronological records of the site. If you liked this video, then I encourage you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, explore the online content, and see new episodes every month with the Archaeology Studio.